half past. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Ms.
Good afternoon. Welcome to our series, the Environmental Education series that we're launching today. We are very excited to launch this amazing series, and we can't wait to have everybody join us for the next couple of months. Today, if you are in the right place, you have come to the first talk in the series. It's called Environmental Education in a Time of Crisis, particularly referring to the COVID-19 pandemic. Today is the 30th of July and it's 2:30, and we will start right away. I would just like to take this opportunity to welcome all the teachers, to welcome our sector partners, to welcome our international guests and partners from FEE, and all people that join from all organizations in the country, DBE, GDE, all education departments, provincially, nationally. We welcome you all protocols observed. We hope you will enjoy the next hour with us. We might go a little bit over time depending on the discussion, but we welcome, this is an engaging space. So just to give you some of our house rules. Oh, first, if you don't know who we are WESSA, and if we've been around for over 94 years, we call ourselves a very young organization, and we have various areas of work that we work in, including the education centers. We have 4 education centers around the country, and Donovan will elaborate on that. We have the Sustainable Tourism Program, we have a Work Skills Program, memberships and youth. And the program that we'll be hosting you today is the schools program. We specifically focus on environmental education in the school sector. For this specific webinar, we have house rules. So as you can see, there are 4 panelists in front of you. It's myself, Donovan will be hosting, and we have 2 guests, which are special guests, which are Prof. Chris Reddy and Mr. Fadli Wagiet. So only the panelist video will be displayed. All attendees are muted, but you can raise your hand or engage with us in the chat box and the question and answer session. And there's a section later where we will highlight your questions to the panelists and the host. And then also we have 2 polls that we will launch during the course of this session, and we will tell you exactly which poll to answer when. And we want you to engage as much as possible. As I said, we might run a little bit over time, and that depends on your engagement with us. But we won't go too long. It won't be an hour and a half. It will just be a little bit 10 minutes or so. And then for those who are not able to join today, the session will be recorded and will be available on our website immediately after the session. So I will hand over to Mr. Donovan Fullard, who's the General Manager of the Schools Program. He will facilitate the session between the 2 guest speakers. So over to you, Donovan.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to all. I see quite a number of people have already joined us, 105 it indicates here. Special welcome to our international guests. I see someone from Namibia, and then our Foundation for Environmental Education in Copenhagen, Pramod, and then our chairperson on the FEE board, Laura Hickey from the States. They've also joined us, I see. So welcome to everybody, and particularly the teachers that are part of our programs, and all our partners, like Lisa said. It's my pleasure to introduce the topic for this afternoon's webinar, as well as our 2 esteemed guests that are joining us today. We're quite excited to have to launch this series, and also to start off with these 2 gentlemen. You will agree with me that 2020 has been quite an eventful and challenging year thus far, and especially the last 4 months spent wearing masks, sanitizing, and social distancing has become the new normal to us. So as the WESSA Schools Program, we thought it apt for our first webinar in a planned series, as Louise has indicated, that we set the tone by focusing on environmental education in this time of crisis, referring to the COVID-19 pandemic as a way to kickstart us. So allow me to introduce our two guests, and I would just like to share my screen with all of you. So allow me to introduce our guests. The first guest that I will be introducing is Professor Chris Reddy. He's from the Stellenbosch University, and his area of specialization is an interest include environmental education, curriculum studies, and teacher education. He's published quite widely and regularly, as you can see there on the screen. Chris is also the coordinator of the environmental education program at Stellenbosch University, also called EPIS, and they do research and development work as part of the social impact of the Faculty of Education at the Stellenbosch University. He's been involved with funded national research projects and also serves as a project leader in various projects in Stellenbosch and other parts of the country as well, with in-service teachers. And then Chris is a C3 NRF rated researcher as well. Our next guest is Mr. Fadli Wagiet, and he's a curriculum specialist, advisor, and lecturer. His experience in schools spans over more than 3 decades. Actually, by the way, all three of us, our career spans over 3 decades, Chris and Fadli, if that's correct. So Fadli has 20 years experience as a biology teacher. He's been, for 10 years, he's been a life science and natural science curriculum advisor. And to the latter part of his career, he was a GET coordinator in the Western Cape Education Department. His experience in environmental education includes a master's from Rhodes in EE. He also holds an MSc from UWC. And then he's lectured in environmental education at Stellenbosch University and worked with a range of partners within the network, working for water across the country, various projects that we've also worked with Sanby, Two Oceans, and other institutions, as you can see on the screen there. He's also been part of an international teacher program. And very importantly, he spearheaded a successful lead teacher project down in the Western Cape. And I am one of the products of that successful lead teacher project, mind you. Fadli was also my curriculum advisor at school at some stage when I was a life science teacher as well. And then obviously teacher education, he's got some experience in that as well. He's worked in Northern Cape and Eastern Cape with the UWC's Science Learning Center for Africa program. He's also worked on various programs with Professor Chris Reddy at Stellenbosch University. And recently, he's been part of the development of the FET Marine Science Curriculum for Two Oceans as an advisor in an advisory capacity. And currently, he's also lecturing at the University of Western Cape as part of a master's program in the Integrated Water Resource Management program. So, gentlemen, welcome and thank you for joining us today. And we are looking forward. Let me just stop sharing that. We are looking forward to your insights today and your wisdom that you're going to share with us today. So we're looking forward to that. But before we listen to our speakers, ladies and gentlemen, we would like to involve you as the participant in a poll. So I'm going to ask Lamise just to bring up a question or as part of the poll that we need you to answer for us. So if you can just read the question there with me. So environmental issues manifest in various ways at different scales in the world as we know it. We would like you to choose on 3 different levels. So we look at global issues, and the second one will be national issues, and the last one will be local issues. So please, can you make your vote now around the global issues, and then Louise can bring up the second one. The reason why we're asking you to participate in this poll is as part of the discussion, and hopefully Professor Chris Reddy will also pick up on the key priorities that you are responding to in this poll. Lamise, how are we doing with the voting? Can we move over to the next one, the national issues? Lamise?
Yeah, everybody is voting simultaneously, local, national, and international.
Oh, okay, so they could see that. Okay.
They can see all 3, yeah.
Okay, sorry, I thought they could only see it at once. Okay. So yeah, how are we doing in terms of the number of people that have voted?
39% of people have voted so far.
Shall we just give another few seconds for people just to make their ticks?
Lamis, I think there was a message struggling to submit.
I see it.
So the global issues are A, climate change and global warming, B, marine plastic and oil pollution, C, social conflict and war, and then D, intercontinental migration. And then the national issues are energy, A, energy production and supply, B, housing provision, C, pollution, water pollution, sorry, and D, biodiversity loss. And then the third category, which are the local issues, are air pollution, racism, food security, and unemployment. People are still having problems. They say submitting. Lamis, are you winning on that side?
Yes, Donovan. So 78% of people have voted. So I'll end the poll so that you can read the results.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, that's fine then. Sorry for those that have not been able to submit. We will try and Lamis will in the background try and sort out whatever technical glitch there is that we. Lamis, can you maybe bring up that the results of the poll?
There we go.
Okay, so in terms of global issues, it seems as if climate change and global warming has gotten the most votes. In terms of national issues, that was close between biodiversity loss, energy production and supply, and then water pollution. And then lastly, the local issues, unemployment being quite high, 53%, and food security, 42%. Our panelists, just quickly, if you want to just comment on that for now, just quickly, we can come back to this at a later stage. Chris and Fadli, just given the results there, is it congruent with what you're expecting, or just any comment for now?
I was not expecting anything.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay.
Chris,
can you
from my side, Donnie, it's interesting, the results.
Okay.
And it is definitely highlighting what the audience are thinking. And that is what is important for us. Like Chris said, we have an open mind. We want to hear what the people are saying, and we'll pick it up later.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. And thank you for all the participants for participating in the poll. And once again, apologies to those that could not participate. We'll try in the background to sort that out. Okay, so I want to introduce our first talk. I've referred to the current global pandemic, and we all know and have experienced the impact of it on our lives on a both personal and a professional level. So as NGOs as well, and other public and government entities that are present here on this platform today as well, working within schools, and especially the teachers here, it has been quite a challenging and testing period for all of us. Challenging us to think creatively and innovatively as we talk about and refer to the new normal. We hear that word quite often being punted and so on. So the environment related to education is often described as education responding to the environmental crisis. So Chris, Professor Chris Reddy, I want to ask you, is there a crisis in this context? And what are the components of such a perceived crisis? And if you could maybe just respond to that in your talk. So if I can hand over to you, Chris. I know that you share a few slides with us, so if you can just bring up your slides and just share that with us.
Is that from my side? Okay, can we just have a pic quickly? Okay, Lamis. All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being part of our discussion. I think, as was indicated with the poll, there were no preconceived expectations as to how and what people would say, but just it gives an indication of where we are and how we might proceed. So, Donovan, to your question about, I think that idea that the field of environmental education is a response is as old as the field itself. And I think that there's never been a consensus understanding of what happens in the field and how the response actually realizes in practices at various levels. One thing about the field is its great diversity of people and practices and practitioners, which other than, let's say, more traditional, if we can use that term, fields or subfields of education, there's a much higher diversity. However, given all that, there's always been a wide range of perspectives on the field. And some people believe there's conceptual mayhem in the field of environmental education. And getting a consensus understanding has been very difficult. So I want to give a perspective, which is my perspective, and we can always talk about that. And it's a perspective that has evolved over around 3 decades of work in the field. And I think something that has happened now is, we've had something more added to what we would refer to as a crisis. I just want to sketch, the crisis development with the slide that I have there now. Well, Lamis, could I not work my slides myself?
Yes, you
In the
can.
sense that I can,
Yes, you
with the
can.
animation. Do I have to share that?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, I'll do that in a second, but I'll talk in the meantime.
Because if you share it from
Just
your side,
waiting.
then you can
Yeah,
control it.
she needs to allow me. Okay, there we go. Okay, so we are there. Now I want to, let's see if I can get this over here. There we go, it's not show. Oh, no, man. There we go. Okay, so as I said, we have this crisis and we have a pandemic, and I think that logo is everywhere and coming out of our ears. I just want to sketch part of the background to the crisis. And I think one big point is that the Anthropocene, this epoch, or this human domination, this geological epoch, running from 1945, the end of the Second World War, to where we are now, has often been seen as part of the problem. It's not as if things went wrong in the world. It was a social process of human intervention that actually, through rampant urbanization, industrialization, economic growth, rebuilding economies after the Second World War, population increases, industrial scale agriculture needed for food and food production, resultant pollution of various kinds leading to ecosystem degradation, nature seen largely as a resource for human exploitation, modernism and consumerism, and so many other isms. But modernism, there's strong belief in science and sophisticated economies, and the consumerism that you have to buy, and throw away and buy and so on, became sort of lifestyles, narratives that, grand narratives that unconsciously caught us all up. And economic development and standards of living for humans, it certainly was all about humans. And that period has not left us unscathed or in any way, the world in a better place, even though it supposedly that was the aim. I think we moved from, where there were many scenes like depicted in this little drawing. I won't call it a cartoon, I'll call it an illustration, okay? But I think you would agree with me that there is more where we are. And with that, we can see it's dominated by lots of human activities and human detail. On the picture, oh, good heavens, where are we now? Let me there we go. I need to get there, and from, yeah, technology is always doing things, yeah. I seem to have lost my PowerPoint there. Let me just see if I can find it. Yes, I've got it. I'm going to go there, and I'm going to go from current slide. Okay, there we are. I was saying that is more what we see. And we've seen a lot of this disappearing, as in that picture, largely being replaced by scenes like this, housing, human settlements, other economic and all human developments. If we look at this picture and want to analyze it, it's probably lots of fertile soil and productive soil under the Star and all those buildings in lower Manhattan. Okay, so we're talking about big human impact. And let's just go to David Orr, and another author that joined him was Myers, who said, you know, we were at the point where on a typical day on planet Earth, we would have this happening, you know, 130 square kilometers of tropical forest still happening, disappearing. Land will become desert and all the other things. I'm not going to read all the detail. Okay, but the last part, 250,000 new people, population increases, demand for food, water, and other resources. By the end of the day, it'll be a little hotter, climate change and global warming, the rain a little more acidic, and the fragile web of Earth, of life on Earth, a little more torn and tattered. And I think those things led Edwards to say that we as humanity are sitting on the edge of a precipice, faced with making decisions that influence life on Earth. And Suzuki, the rate of population growth, which we saw in Orr's quote there as well, and the use of the resources, both renewable and non-renewable, will lead to a decline in the capacity of the Earth's ecosystems, and which supports life-sustaining processes. I'm not going into all the detail of the cycles of oxygen and water, etc., etc. Okay, so the question we asked then, are we in a crisis? And I think that Anthropocene period has brought us to a point where many feel our blue planet is being distorted and taking on dimensions and shape of the red planet. And like you said, climate change and global warming being the biggest culprits in leading to the shifts and changes, and which has fueled the crisis which we like to say we are living in. Okay, so there are other things as well, and for convenience, Robert Donahue and others have actually developed a model of representation for the environment, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And I just want to sort of superimpose issues within the crisis as depicted in the slide over here, in terms of what we would call the dimensions of the environment, okay? And the model of representation, I think, is quite familiar to many. So social, you know, there've always been issues of conflict. There've been global conflict, there are wars, there are local conflicts with people, gangsterism, and so on. Economically, exploitation of people to make this economy grow and to get the developmental things associated with the Anthropocene and development and consumerism. You know, economies guided by neoliberal policies have become quite harsh in the way they deal with people, leading to lots of inequalities economically. And politically, human rights, democracies are being eroded because exploitation and environmental degradation and other political issues like racism and domination of people and erosion of rights are all hand in glove. They all go together. But it's up to politicians to manage and make sure that these things don't get out of hand. So the political dimension has been and has shifted almost in favor of economics. It favors the corporations. It became even more so during globalization, where multinationals were exploiting resources far from their home bases. But all of that has been part of and fueling the crisis resulting from the Anthropocene. And then we have the biophysical at the bottom in this diagram, because it's foundational. It's on which everything depends. It's the planet Earth, you know, runs and is a planet on which humans can biologically exist because of the biophysical environment, its processes, and what is happening there. So the crisis we are in, have been in, can be sort of represented dimensionally, as I have done so in the diagram, and others have, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with. I want to come to a factor and an occurrence that has merely exacerbated the problem of the crisis that we were part of and have been unconsciously part of, but have also consciously been part of the response, because I think many people in the audience here are involved in education of various kinds, be it formal, be it informal, be it conservation. But so the response, which we spoke of at the beginning, and the crisis have always been there, and the two are not oppositional, but the education response is the response trying to reduce problems and issues in the environment, reduce environmental degradation currently, and prevent future issues and problems. Let's come to something which is in our faces for a while now, and that is COVID-19. I just want to highlight something to you. I read this, that, you know, the idea of this in Wuhan is that there was transfer from animals, from a bat and a snake, and there's all kinds of narratives. But the point there is to take from there was zoonotic transfer, animal to animal transfer. And then apparently there was consumption of exotic animals, which is not the normal, for those who are carnivores, it's not the normal sort of meat people would eat. It would be considered exotic, like bats and so on, exotic in certain contexts, maybe not others. Now, it was said that that kind of consumption was common, but it was restricted to little villages and little isolated places. And there were viruses that emerged from that. There were deaths, but they were small. But these were isolated, because eating exotic animals and so on is a culturally embedded practice. So it is not considered to be strange. But those things happened. But in a global world, dominated by multinationals, air travel, where you can have breakfast in Cape Town, you can have lunch in in London, and you can have breakfast in New York, and it's all in the same day, and your luggage will be in Singapore. But anyway, the point is, so those things were there, but in a global world, dominated by multinationals and all these things, it spread like wildfire. It was not isolated to little villages and places where it was commonplace, but it spread. And we know where we are now, and that would be where we are. So, nice picture, isn't it? For those who, all of you, I'm sure, have a science background. A protein coat encasing strand of RNA has brought the world to its knees. Okay, now where are we with this whole thing? There are dimensional effects there. We have the new language, the new normal, all the cliche terms that have come up out of this that we have to live with, and the practices that we have to engage in. But let's come back to our environment. Yes, there are dimensional effects if I talk of the representation of the environment in 4 dimensions. But this is a global impact, right? Nobody's out of the woods here. It's a global impact down to that village where it used to happen in outside of Wuhan. It's an unprecedented pandemic. And it has forced us to rethink our responses and the way we work on all of this, okay? So let me just try and from my perspective, just refocus some of the issues that have sort of emerged again even deeper from the COVID crisis. So politically, there needs to be lots of decision making, and there needs to be clear leadership, honesty, transparency, a shift in fiscal orientation. Now we know a lot of that is not happening. There's dishonesty in many places. There's false news coming from lots of places, you know. There's even the word that we've turned COVID-19 pandemic into a spectator sport. You know, you've got to switch on the TV to check the score every night. How many people died, where and when, and how many are still going to die more, right? And who's got the highest and who's got the lowest, and that kind of thing. So we're looking at the league tables and all that kind of stuff, okay? But we need honest, secure, and decisive leadership politically. Economically, well, we've fallen into an economic depression, fueling even further unemployment, poverty, and we need serious reorganization, work from home. I'm getting cabin fever from being confined to a home base, but it's all part of, in an economic zone, there have been other issues that have become more foregrounded due to the pandemic, which we cannot ignore. Social is anxiety. We all are anxious. Food security for a lot of people. Schooling, children, people are arguing for children to go to school so that they can get a meal. Education uncertainty. Then we open, then we close. Then we're going to reduce the curriculum, then we're not. Then we're going to maintain standards, then we're going to do something else. But it's about uncertainty. And even more conflict with people, because people are not feeling safe, people are not feeling secure, and social conflict is rising. And I'll come to it in my last thing as well. In the biophysical, I think one thing that has come out is that energy is something we need to rethink strongly and make it a priority, because part of our problems are the way we've been working with energy and fossil fuels and all that goes along with that, the coal mining, and how we've had big biophysical impact through the mining and the use of the products that emerge from this. Conservation needs maybe a bigger focus and emphasis. Ecosystem protection, part of conservation, and addressing pollution at all levels. And I think the last one here is, in this crisis, we've had inequalities in all areas just being lifted up. But these inequalities didn't emerge now. They're old inequalities. But like anything else, they say, if you scratch around with a few issues, you often open up or expose other issues still in there, have been there already. And I think those things have been happening. So, the crisis has taken on another form in that it is still dimensional, but maybe certain issues need to be foregrounded differently and in other ways, okay? And then I'll just come to my last slide. I hope I'm still within my time range, Lamise. And that is that, so education has always been seen as a response, okay? And I think that, let me just say, environmental education. If we define environment as nature and human activities, or the product between the existing world, the physical, natural world, which predates the human-created social world. But we cannot deny that the environment is a product of that, of what people do, what we all do, how we live, and how we impact on the natural, physical world. And if we take education in red for good reason, it's a dangerous topic and space. It's a social process between people in varying contexts, okay? Combine those two, environment and education. I think largely, there are 100,000 definitions for sustainability, environment, education, and all those things. But to put this in a nutshell, and I know people often say what can be put in a nutshell belongs in a nutshell, but I mean just succinctly presenting it. Let me move into a green box. And I think the green box is environmental education. And no matter how we view it, I think environmental education is always about, has been, and can be, reducing risks and threats to all of us on Earth, not just humans, to everything. And striving for humans for sustainable living practices, however you want to define sustainable. So I think it doesn't matter if the crisis shifts, right? If we are about reducing risks and threats, it's about getting our stuff to work in order to respond to risks and threats, no matter what the risk and what the threat. And those are always going to change, which means the conceptual mayhem I spoke about and the knowledge or epistemological lack of clarity for the field or subfield will always be there. But it's going to have to all the time be adjusted and shifted and be responsive and emergent. There are no fixed answers. It's an emergent field and an emergent process in complex situations. And in the complexity theory tells us that interactions within complex spaces leads to emergence, which is responses, right, at different levels, whether it be local, national, global, but it happens through interactions, and education is one of those. And we believe that environmental education has a role to play even in this crisis, provided we can understand the risks and we can adjust and respond to the risks by re-prioritizing and foregrounding what needs to be focused on in order to reduce risks and promote sustainable living practices. Thank you. I will end there.
Okay, thank you, Chris. I just want
Am
to.
I over time or am I in time?
You were red flagged
Oh.
a long time ago, so.
I'm so sorry. You cut me off.
We'll excuse you. We'll excuse you for that. Just a comment.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chris, for your talk. We're not going to, have a discussion about it now. I want to encourage the participants to use the chat, or actually the Q&A tab. There's a Q&A tab that you can ask the questions, and Mies will screen all the questions that we will have after my talk later on. So either if you're comfortable with the chat, but I would prefer that you use the Q&A. You can also stay anonymous in that space if you don't want to see what questions you ask. So use the Q&A, everybody, to ask your questions to the panelists, please. Okay, without further ado, I want to, because time is against us, I want to introduce our next talk. I want to introduce Fadli, and he will reflect on COVID-19 and the environment. That's the broad topic that he will chat about. So Fadli's also got just a slide that we must bring on. So Fadli, I want to bring you in, and at this point ask the question to you is kind of twofold. Can you share with us your thoughts on COVID-19, what COVID-19 has highlighted to us, what we've learned from this pandemic? And secondly, is there a place for environmental teaching and learning currently or presently? I just want in your talk maybe just to highlight or to focus on that. Over to you, Fadli.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Fadli Wagiet, and I'm going to focus. Thanks, Chris, for your background. You've touched on a number of things that I was going to touch on, so I won't have to go into much depth there. But I'm going to focus more on the pedagogical side, the schooling side, because that is my history. And what has COVID-19 highlighted for us in environmental education and schooling per se? I would like to reiterate what Chris said. What I'm going to be sharing was not started by the pandemic, has always been there. But the pandemic has brought it, to center stage again. So the first thing is I'm talking about, and for those people that have studied a bit, I'm speaking about John Finn's core democratic values of people relationships to promote social justice, and people-nature relationship to promote ecological sustainability. Now, what COVID has highlighted is that what Chris spoke about, the Anthropocene, that some people, some geographers say, no, it's not yet a geological period. However, if we look at it, it started, like Chris said, with the Industrial Revolution, when people started changing their means of production, their vision of what is happiness, etc. And what was highlighted was that, number one, at the initial start of COVID, all of a sudden, the world became a cleaner place. Some cities saw blue skies for the first time. And please, your students can go and Google. It's good enough for them to Google. If they come to university, we will kill them for that. But for schools, you just have to Google, COVID-19 and the environment, and you get a lot of brilliant examples of, what initially happened. So again, it has highlighted the relationship between us as a single species, Homo sapiens, with the rest of our co-inhabitants on this earth. And what an unhealthy relationship that has been. The second thing here that, again, COVID-19 and the environmental crisis has in common for me is that we cannot have an attitude, not in my backyard, or I'm okay, you're okay. Because COVID-19, like the environment, disregarding where you are on this earth, it has impacts on everybody. And what you do in one corner, like what happened with Wuhan and the spread of the pandemic, highlighted that again for me. We cannot, feel if I'm staying, in a particular green area and the city council is giving us the resources which they're not giving to others, so why should I worry about anybody else? The pandemic has brought that type of view that we have, that, I don't have to worry about other people so long I'm okay. And that is something we need to really engage in, the type of values that we are teaching in our schools. Then for those bio people like Brian Wilson and so many other biology teachers, we often say that when we do ecology, if you remove all the insects, life on Earth will come to an end. However, if we remove the one species, and please look in the mirror, you'll know which species I'm talking about, then, the world will flourish as the initial stage of the COVID-19 pandemic has shown. However, I will not go into the Anthropocene. I think Chris did enough about that, spoken now. It is the period on Earth where one species, I repeat, a single species, causing, the quality of life of all our other coexisting species on Earth, the worst type of environment for them to live in. Now, the question that I normally ask my students, have we learned from this experience? Because scientists have already said now, with the first, wave of the pandemic in certain places coming to some form of control, immediately the economy, started going back to its old means of production, but at a higher rate. And we're finding various levels of different pollutions being higher than when the pandemic started. So I'm sorry to say, are we as Earthlings, a learning community? And this is something that we need to, engage with our learners, with our various communities, because otherwise we are back to square one. Because the environmental crisis and the pandemic crisis have so much in common. Because both is directly responsible for lowering the quality of life for everybody, obviously at different levels. And I repeat again, different levels. The poorest of the poor, obviously, is getting the rawest deal as far as the pandemic. And so these are some thoughts that went through my mind when I started thinking about what is this saying to me as an environmental educator. Just to sum up, number one, it's highlighting what should our relationship be with our natural environment, our home, and what it is, and how it could be. And then, the whole notion of Ubuntu. I can only be if you are. But we are all, have become, like Chris said, consumerism. We engage in the discourse of the I and not the discourse of the we. And that is something that the pandemic has highlighted again. Disregarding you rich or poor, you can be infected and you can infect other people. Again, I would like to highlight that we are not, in charge of the environment. We are part of that environment. And again, what do we do, if we don't learn from what is happening around us? We often say that environmental education, that we must leave the world in a better place for my grandchildren. And I have one, obviously, she is the most intelligent, the most beautiful 4-year-old child. And I would like to believe that she's going to inherit an earth that is habitable. However, I question that, because we have not looked seriously at changing our ways of being on this earth. So let me stop there and let me go to my second area. And I ask a question, I always tell my students, don't tell me the how and the where and the when. First, engage in the why question. And I am asking this for myself. Is there a place for environmental education? Education for sustainability, sustainable development education, whatever you want to call it. And I agree with Chris 100%. There is a need. We've said it in the 70s and 80s that environmental education is pivotal to improving the quality of education in our schools. And I still believe that. So what does that mean for if I was now in schools and my heart bleeds for the teachers being confronted by those uncertainties that Chris spoke about, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So let's go to Vygotsky and the zone of proximal development. Start where the learner is and scaffold them to a higher level of understanding. And this now becomes important. We've always said that environmental education must be education within a context, the context of the learner, and not like the latest curriculum, which decontextualizes learning completely. And obviously, I have problems with that. And again, we need to start and ask ourselves, what is the reality of the child's environment during this pandemic? And then this will allow them to tell us, if you don't know it, so ek sal gesê het vir my studente, dan is julle slegter onderwysers as hulle nie weet waarvandaan julle kinders kom nie. I'm still old school, so if I'm tramping on toes, good for me. Now, that then allows us to go into this construct of environment which Ekins put on the table a couple of decades ago. Robert Donahue and Eureka of Rhodes, you know, put much more flesh on it. Because we need to start looking for some children, the green issues would be important to start with. But for the majority of the downtrodden and poor, it is the brown issues. And therefore, with the environment, you know, the social reality of our children under these conditions. Are they safe at home? Are they safe at the school? You know, gangsterism, etc. The political issue. And we have said, if our president starts again, you know, with a particular phrase, which I won't mention now, then we start getting heart attacks again. And again, obviously, the economic. The reality of the economics in the different realities of our South Africans. What is the reality, the economic reality for people in Langa, people in Manenberg, compared to us middle class living in Little Mowbray or Constantia? Our suffering is different. And therefore, that contextual reality and using the theories of Vygotsky needs to become a real issue. And that then opens up, if we start with a child to hear what are they confronted with, to unpack the construct environment. Again, there is a quote that I often use, and that is, not in isolation, but in partnership to promote quality education for all our children in our country. Life is complex. The environmental crisis is complex. The pandemic crisis is complex. The economic crisis is complex. And I can go on and on and on. Our health situation. Look at the Eastern Cape. What's happening there? So we cannot solve this alone. We need to work together. We need to talk to each other constructively, because only in partnerships, and what was very interesting for me, the United Nations, UNEP, never was very individualistic. But, 2 decades ago, they started also speaking about partnerships as a modus operandi of addressing these challenges. So, as teachers, as NGOs, as various levels of government, I like the concept community of practice. I don't like the concept that the national department is using. But we need to develop these community of practices. And for me, a basic is us, like my granddaughter always says, Grandpa, sharing is caring. But here we need to speak about educational quality sharing. And I'm not promoting victim mentality. If you're part of a community of practice, you need to bring your side. And therefore, working together on a common challenge, but in a sustainable way, in an ongoing way. And our huge challenge is, are we engaging in quality education? And with the pandemic, we must not allow that vision to go out by the front door. How do we engage in quality education for all under, online pedagogies, which is under research, and nobody can come here and tell any of us that this is the way to go. It hasn't been researched well. So, I'm going to stop here. I just wanted to throw out ideas and for us to come back to interrogate some of these, or you putting on your ideas on the agenda. But I want to hand over to Donnie and let Donnie share with us in which way could WESSA, as an example of a partnership, support quality teaching and learning in our schools. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Fadli. I'm just trying to share my screen with you. Is it coming up? Okay. Lamuse, can you just indicate if the screen is shared?
It is.
Okay. Thank you, Fadli. So yeah, before I do a quick talk, I would like to encourage people more to ask your questions in the Q&A, because after my talk, we'll have a Q&A session. I know some of you are asking to participate as well. So, be free to ask your questions in the comment section there. So as a response to the two talks, I would like to share with you an overview of the WESSA Schools program and our response to the COVID-19 pandemic and how we are trying to adapt to this crisis. So allow me to share a few slides with you. First of all, and I think both Fadli and Chris has alluded to this diagram. The philosophy of the WESSA Schools program has always been informed and underpinned by the understanding of the environment as a multi-dimensional concept, as depicted in this diagram, in the slide. Our school program's approach is based on our understanding of the environment as being multidimensional, that consists of those four key dimensions that both of the speakers have alluded to. And we like the analogy of the spider web in the center of this diagram, showing that every part of the web is connected to every other part, and making the web both complex and powerful. If any part is weakened or disconnected, the overall value and strength of this web is severely compromised. The environment from this perspective, which we call the web of life, forms for us as WESSA Schools program the foundation or basis of all the work that we do in offering environmental education through the WESSA Schools program across the country. Thus, linking the environment with education and responding to our mandate and aligning with our strapline, which is people caring for the earth. Just to give you an overview of the ecosystem of the school program, for those of you who are not familiar with the WESSA Schools program, on the left-hand side, you see the 3 international schools program that's under the banner of the Foundation for Environmental Education, short FEE, and it's the Young Reporters for the Environment, the Learning About Forests, the Eco Schools program. And on the far right, you see the WESSA Eco Campus, a program that we've also introduced last year, which is the older brother or sister of the eco-schools, which operates in the higher education institution. Eco-schools, obviously, most of you are familiar with that program because it's been our flagship that we've implemented since 2003. Then we've also piloted other programs, ECT programs called Head Start, and an entrepreneurship education programs in high school called Triple H. And then lastly, the Sustainable Schools program, which is a water, energy, food nexus approach. And we've got one project that's running currently in the rural villages of the Chris Hani District Municipality. And that project is also coming to an end this year. So just to give you a sense of the scope of the work that we do within the WESSA Schools program. I need to be quite quick because we lost out on a bit of time. So just to give you a sense of the kind of projects that we offer, I see some of our funders are also online, and the funders make it possible for us, also based on their requirements and their agendas. We offer projects across those 9 areas as you see there, from greening to food security to ECT to maths and science or STEAMAC, or entrepreneurship education, or the development of 21st century skills. So those are some of the projects that we currently offer within schools primarily, and thanks to the funders that are making that possible for us. But quickly, just in terms of today's discussion, I want to just talk about our strategy that we needed to oops, and I fast forwarded there, sorry for that. I want to talk briefly about our strategy in terms of helping school in this crisis, and the strategy was planned, obviously, to impact on schools and communities, but also teachers to assist learners in this crisis period. And it's based on 3 key elements, which is curriculum support, school readiness, and food security. So within school curriculum support, and these 3 key elements, I must say, is also aligned to the Department of Basic Education's guidelines and these strategies as well. So we have a range of resources that we've over the years have developed and so on. So those we've amended, and we've used that to share with teachers across the country in terms of that are participating in our programs. So giving teachers ideas for lesson plans and knowledge tools that we've created that we've shared with teachers in this period. Secondly, school readiness, and I'll show you a few pictures of what we've done in this recent time. So, some of the things are developing hands-free tippy taps for safe hand washing, delivering water cans to school for safe drinking water points, and establishing a long-term kind of sanitation management plan for schools, and obviously developing information around awareness, the campaigns around COVID-19 as well, the pandemic. And then thirdly, food security. As part of our programs, and particularly eco-schools, you would know that food gardens is a big component of the eco-schools program. And so what we try to do is to give seedlings to schools so that they can enhance their food gardens. There's a whole drive for health and well-being and nutrition education in schools. So we've developed some resources in that regard, but also to upskill the learners, and that's the plan. But obviously we've been constrained by access to learners in this period. But the idea was to upskill them so they can have the knowledge to take back home and start with their food garden and so on. So I must commend our funders because our funders fund particular programs related to particular themes and issues, environmental issues. But they were all, when we approached them with the strategy, they were all flexible in terms of for us to respond to this crisis and so on. So I just want to take you through some of the things that we've been doing currently. 2 weeks ago, when we could have access to schools, the Glencore project, for example, in Mpumalanga, at 5 schools, we could erect these food tunnels. That was quite exciting. There are some of the other schools where we've been able to use the funding to buy them seedlings as well, and they're starting their food tunnels and their food gardens in that way. Just last week, we had in Kwakwa, in the Free State area, we had the launch of the sanitation materials that we supply in schools. So this is part of the school readiness program, where the funders were so flexible in terms of we were able to redirect the funds to buy seedlings, as you can see there, these sanitizing systems, water cans. There was a big launch at the school in Katlego Primary School. You see some of the DBE officials, the SGB members. You see the system that we've designed, specially designed for this project. So it's a tippy tap. It's a kind of upgrade to the tippy tap that we normally use. And so we've asked an engineer to, part of one of our projects, to design us a longer lasting tippy tap system that that we could use in the schools and so on. And these were rural schools up in Kokpa, and so they haven't even seen these sanitizing systems. So it was quite new to them, you know, being exposed to these sanitizing systems. And they obviously linked to it is the curriculum information packs that we shared with schools, and they used some images of the implementation last week that we had. And then lastly, also, you would know that we have quite a few environmental education centers that are across the country. They've also, unfortunately, had to be closed, but we were quite innovative in responding to that. So our education centers have developed this WESSA on Wheels program. And so now we have this mobile classroom that not necessarily replace our traditional residential camp, but provides you with a cost-effective alternative in this period of COVID and so on. So we're taking WESSA to schools and communities. So we roll out this program to schools and communities within a 200-kilometer radius of those environmental education centers that you can see there. So you're free to make inquiries around bookings if you're interested in doing that. So in a nutshell, I know I didn't have much time, but I just wanted to give you a sense of the responses that we're having as WESSA in terms of responding to this crisis that we have out there. So yeah, that's it from my side. So Louise, I know we're running a bit over time, and we did warn you at the start of this webinar that time is going to be an issue. I've seen the Q&A questions have quite increased, which is quite great. So Louise has asked you if we can run over 15 minutes or so just to deal with those questions, because I think we also need to hear your voices and for you to have the some questions that you would like to ask us. So Louise, I've asked Louise just to highlight some of the questions for us, and then you can direct it to Chris to respond to the questions that were asked by the attendees.
Okay, this answers quite a few of the questions. It's a summary of quite a few of the questions. It is, has COVID-19 pandemic reshaped the relationship between these 4 dimensions of politics, social economics, and the environment? And what are the issues we should focus on? So that can go to both Prof. Chris and Fadli.
Okay, I'll go. First of all, I would like to believe that the relationship between these 4 aspects of the environment before and now, after the start of the pandemic, has been, you know, there hasn't been a dramatic difference between that relationship. What the pandemic has done, it has highlighted and has exacerbated the focus that we are having on highlighting the inequalities in all the spheres. You know, again, if you're looking at 30 years ago, we spoke about the woodlot challenge of the people in the West Coast, that the poorest of the poor were cutting off trees because of poverty. They didn't have an alternative to heat their food, etc. So what is the relationship today between the biophysical and, you know, humans? That hasn't changed. The sad part is, like scientists was writing now, with the opening up of the economy, the business world is now working at a higher rate to try and make up for the profit losses of the past month or 2 or 3. So the exploitation is going to, you know, increase. The social reality, yes, has it become worse? I can't say. We don't have our finger on the pulse of what's happening in the Guguletus and the Manenbergs and the Mitchell's Plain and the Khayelitsha that we should have to be able to say, this is what the thermometer is telling us. But things have not gotten better. Not saying that it wasn't as bad as it is at present in the past. And so for me, and Chris, please come in, the crisis before and afterwards with our relationship with the environment, I don't think that has dramatically changed. The pandemic has just highlighted these inequalities and these relationships. And then again, if somebody asks me, what are the priorities? If you were in my master's class, I would say that is linear thinking. And in a complex environment, A doesn't lead to B, doesn't lead to C. And because the context of the people in one area is different to the context in another area, and if we engage with our learning theories, our priorities will be different on the local level. However, there are national levels that we need to focus on. And I think Chris alluded to that in his talk. Chris, your views, please.
I think, there's no one size fits all answer to where we're going and where we might go. Okay. I'm going to respond to some of the questions. Look, obviously there have been shifts in of what we need to prioritize. And that's why I said our field needs to be responsive. And that is what we must not forget. We need to respond to what is the problem in the local context. There were questions about, what sort of pedagogies and how do we do the kind of experiential learning when we cannot have more than 5 children within a radius of 20 meters or whatever that might be. I think that's very difficult to project to and to predict. But I can only say, by putting heads together, right, and looking at the realities, we can find responses, not necessarily solutions, but responses. We can develop materials that can be, let's say, posted to people that they can use where they are. I had an interesting, I picked up an interesting thing many years ago when I was working with marine ecology and school ecology, where there was a group in America that used to send frozen samples to places that are inland and were not coastal regions. They'd send them frozen stuff and then they would thaw it at the place where it came to, and the students will still play with the stuff. So, there's always, there are always ways of addressing things, but we've got to put our heads together and take it as we go. We cannot project, and there are no easy answers. It's an unprecedented, difficult space we're in, but we've got to use what we have. We've got to use our initiatives, our ingenuity, our experiences, and take it from there. I cannot give, particular recipes. There aren't any recipes. But the pedagogies of environmental education are useful. They are documented, and there are ways that we can work with those things. But that again, like Fadli, I think you did say, environmental problems are contextual. So environmental responses are often localized because problems and issues arise in local context.
Thank you. Another question from Laura Iki. I love the concept of community of practice, which can be local, national, or international. My question is around how to ensure that educators know how to practice and implement this concept. And in the time of COVID, when many classrooms are being held online, what is the best way to engage in community of practice and how to best train educators on how to do that virtually?
Chris, I'll go first. Chris and myself both did our Masters in Action Research. And Donnie was part of that, of my action research. And yes, we were very naive and young and believed we're going to change the world. And we started that. We rigged up our own curriculum and we implemented, and very soon we realized we're not an island, that we're part of a bigger reality. But one of the things that we found in all of our work, because Donnie, myself, and Chris, we worked a lot with teacher professional development, with schools. That time has been one of the biggest challenges. And here, one of the top, science educators from Wisconsin University, he made it clear within their book that they wrote that time is one of the biggest challenges. And something that I found with this online thing happening, where I'm having meetings with people on Saturday afternoons. Maybe it's because they could then tell their significant other, sorry, I can't help you now. I've got a meeting with Fadli. So they're abusing me in that way. But this online has overcome the time issue. For people not to come to a workshop when they're tired after they've had 50 kids in their class. And therefore, I look at, setting times when it suits everybody to come together to start talking. That is the first important thing that this pandemic has showed me, a modus operandi, a way of getting people together where they can feel relaxed. How does this play out in the classroom? It can only play out if we are honest with each other. And if, let's assume we say, this is a challenge, and a big challenge is education in the environment at this moment in time. How do we address that? And let's hear from each other. And let's use our classroom as almost like researchers. And let's try something. And then come back a week or later, and let's talk about it. In environmental education, from Rhodes, from Stellenbosch, we've always spoken of the process of working together in a community of practice, online, working away, bringing theory and practice into reality, and then reflecting on that. And then when we come together, we say, these has been our successes, maar hier dink ek, het 'n bietjie klei getrap. How do the rest of you feel? No, that couldn't work in my context. And therefore, honest and open, continuous, talking to each other is a way that we need to start looking at. And you'll be surprised, because with the marine sciences curriculum, which I am so-called the researcher, looking at what is happening at 6 schools in our province, they've started something like this. And you'll be, no, I mustn't say this. Teachers, you are absolutely brilliant. You know your reality. You know what is possible. And you have so much, of, things that you've done that you can share with others. And we don't have to stand back as far as that is concerned. So, we need to look inward before we look outward. And we will be surprised what we are able to share. Because environmental education in this country, like Chris said, we've been around for more than 30 years. And then we've engaged at different levels around this. So yeah, each one, teach one. Chris, your views.
I just want to comment on the community of practice idea. I think when things like community of practice are introduced almost as something to fix up something else, then the point of departure is that we see teachers at a deficit and we have to fix something. If a community of practice is a growth model which allows for inputs and people to make the, share their ideas in a horizontal platform, it is a good thing. I know the Western Cape Education Department was excited about that and tried to impose that a few years ago, Fadli.
Yes, correct.
And that community is still not in existence. But it is a good idea when people, it can't be a contrived idea, where the interaction is a contrived one, where you force people to talk to each other, all these clusters and peanut clusters and everything else that didn't quite work. The point that we need is we have to see teachers as professionals who can take charge of their own growth and development in particular context with particular people. But the imposition of growth and development becomes a deficit model where you try to fix something that is wrong. So I like community of practice, provided it's not an imposition. Okay.
This is I support you 100% because often we in the department go with that deficit model. What is the problem? We go with our suggestions and we never talk with people. We talk down to people. And therefore, deficit model research has shown us all over the world has never, sustained any innovation, disregarding our good it is.
Yeah, so I think NGOs and other organizations like WESSA are important in this process because they have materials, they have people, they have funding, and they can reach people, and they can set up the I like to call it suggestion materials. They put the stuff out there for people to use, and they get feedback, and they make input, and the partnership idea you also mentioned, that's so important. That feeds into growth models. Okay.
Okay, gentlemen and lady, and all the attendees, I think we can go on forever talking about these things, and there's so many other questions that has been posed that we would like to respond to. So between the panelists and myself and the Mies, we can commit to maybe respond to those other questions that we haven't covered. I see we're losing some participants now due to, obviously we said we would like to engage for an hour and then ask people to engage with us for a while further than that. So I think let's conclude. Like I said, we can talk forever and a day around these issues and so on, but let's conclude. I would like to say that this has been extremely valuable, and we've had interesting talks and information shared with us and insights shared with us. So I'd like the panelists just in closing, just to share some closing remarks with us, just to reflect on what has been discussed and maybe have some recommendations and alluding to some of those questions that were asked by the participants, for people working in the sector, like us ourselves as NGOs. There's other NGOs on the session here. There's teachers, there's people in the formal schooling in the sector, and other government entities. What would you recommend? What would your recommendations be going forward in this kind of pandemic or period that we find ourselves, this difficult period that we find ourselves, and that we are faced with? Any parting ideas, thoughts?
I just want to say let's remember that environmental education is a responsive subfield of education, and that we respond to issues at varying levels, particularly at local level when it comes to schooling, and that collaborative work has always been the underpinning understanding for good practice, if I can use the term good practice. And where does collaborative come from? It comes from to co-labor, which means to work together. And I think those two things, collaborative work, responding to people's needs, to environmental issues, to problems like that, has always been the key. And let's respond to risks and issues collaboratively and see how best we can address them.
Okay, if I can add my 2 pennies in here. First of all, the experts in all of this that should actually take the lead are our teachers. They are important. Guys, sorry, before people say I'm gender insensitive, all the teachers out there, we need you to come to the fore, to show us what is possible, because if you like it or not, we have a moral duty to each and every child in each and every one of our schools. So let's not defer a dream again for them that we promised in our constitution, in our preamble, a quality education for all, which hasn't happened. And I'm not going to even allow an argument. I'm going to be a dictator on that point. We have a moral obligation, disregarding pandemic, that ideal of quality education for all, which you can deliver, and you have been delivering for so long under trying times, the different realities. Like I said, our curriculum has always, for the last 26 years and before, been implemented on a landscape of inequality. And then we mustn't lose this vision of developing critical, active citizens that would engage in an informed action to improving the lives of all in our country. Because teachers, you have our country's future in your hands. And you have proven, and we've come through many, pandemics in inverted commas, crises in inverted commas, and we've come out, on the other side. So please, ek wil nou amper uitbreek in song, you've got a friend.
Yeah. Thank you,
And
Fadli.
this is something we must realize, that we need to put our hands out there, because our children deserve nothing better. What they're getting at this moment is shameful. And I don't want to point fingers, because I know our teachers are not to blame. So thanks for listening.
Thank you, Fadli and Chris, for your insights once again. And yeah, I'm going to give the last word to Lamise just to wrap up, and thanks, and then just inform you about the next session. I want to echo just what Fadli has said. The teachers that are on the platform here today, and those that are not part, we need to invite them to take ownership of this kind of platforms and so on. So we'll definitely from our side encourage that. So thanks from my side. Lamise will do the official thanks, and I want to just repeat what Fadli has said earlier, just a comment that he made, to say that environmental education is pivotal to improving education in our schools, and I support that wholeheartedly and so on. So thanks guys for joining me. I know it's our first webinar, but yeah, let's hand over to Lamise to do the official thanks to everyone that's still left on the webinar.
Yes,
Lamise.
thank you, Donovan. Just to say thank you to everyone who joined us. We learned a lot from this first session. We had about 250 people who registered, but due to a technical glitch, only 100 could participate. But this is on our Facebook and social media, and as I said, this will be shared on our website and YouTube. So everybody will have access to this, and the questions that were unanswered, we commit to answering it and sending it in a follow-up email together with the presentation, so you won't miss out on anything. This was an exciting session, the first session. The next one will be on the 27th of August, and it will be facilitated by Cindy. The topic is environmental justice in South Africa, and we will announce special guests. As you can see, we bring heavyweights to our talks, very special people, so watch out for that. Don't mess with WESSA, hey? So as I said, this is a series of talks also. For next month, as I said, it's environmental justice. In September, it will be youth and also greening in schools. So that will conclude the session in September, the webinar sessions in September. But thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to having you next time. Yeah, thank you. That's all from me. Donovan?
No, just from my side as well, this is the first for us, and it was quite exciting and quite nerve-wracking, and at least the technical part played with this time, so we were very scared that we will have some technical glitches. So thanks once again to everybody that participated from all across South Africa, different parts of the world as well, so thanks for our international guests as well, and once again thank you to my two guest speakers that we invited. Just to let you know that in the next session, Cindy is planning to get some learners also involved in the discussion. We want to have, throughout our series, we want to hear the voices of the youth, the teachers in particular. So look out for that. Lamise is coordinating all of this. So look out for emails with regard to this. So once again, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you to Lamise for coordinating this first webinar session, and the team behind the rest of the WESSA Schools team as well. Thank you so much and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Okay.
Do we leave now, and are the four of us going to have a discussion afterwards?
Yes.
on
We'll
another.
call. Yes.
Are you going to send another invite, Lamis, or what?
Yes,
you
I
gonna do?
will. Yes, I will.
Okay.